"Get these poor kids away from my daughter." The angry shout echoed through the quiet Las Vegas public library as wealthy businessman Richard Stevens pointed an accusatory finger at 58-year-old librarian Margaret Foster. The children sitting at the homework table, 7 kids from the neighborhood who came every day after school for free tutoring, looked up in shock and fear. Margaret had been helping these children for over 15 years, watching some of them grow up to become doctors, teachers, and successful citizens. But now, as she faced the red-faced man in his expensive suit, she felt smaller than she ever had in her 4 decades of service. What Richard Stevens didn't know was that Elvis Presley was sitting just 2 tables away, quietly reading a book about meditation, and he had heard every cruel word. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on stages, but in the places where knowledge and compassion meet ignorance and prejudice. But to understand why this moment would change not just Margaret's life, but the entire community's understanding of what education really means, you need to know about the secret sacrifice she had been making for 15 years, a sacrifice that nearly cost her everything. It was October 14, 1975, at the Las Vegas Public Library. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting gentle light across the children's section where Margaret Foster had created something special. What looked like a simple homework help session was actually an intricate support system that had quietly transformed dozens of young lives. In the corner sat Tommy Martinez, age 9, whose father worked double shifts at a casino, and whose mother cleaned hotel rooms until midnight. Tommy struggled with reading, but Margaret had discovered he was brilliant at understanding complex concepts when they were explained properly. She had spent her lunch breaks for 3 months teaching him phonetics, using books she had purchased with her own limited salary. Next to Tommy sat Sarah Chen, whose parents spoke little English but desperately wanted their daughter to succeed. Margaret had learned basic Mandarin phrases just to communicate with Sarah's grandmother when she picked the girl up each evening. The understanding in the elderly woman's eyes when Margaret said Sarah Hen Kongming, "Sarah is very smart," had made every late-night language study session worthwhile. And there was Marcus Williams, 12 years old, whose single mother worked 2 jobs and couldn't afford tutoring. Marcus had a gift for mathematics that Margaret recognized immediately. She had been quietly preparing him for advanced placement tests, spending her weekends researching scholarships and academic programs that could change his entire future. But what none of these children knew was that Margaret's dedication went far beyond her job description. Every month, when her paycheck barely covered her rent and groceries, she made a choice. She would walk to the discount bookstore and spend her food money on educational materials for the children's section. Her own meals became simpler: peanut butter sandwiches, instant soup, whatever was cheapest, so that kids like Tommy, Sarah, and Marcus could have access to the books they needed. Richard Stevens had no knowledge of this sacrifice when he stormed into the library that autumn afternoon. All he saw was his 10-year-old daughter Emma sitting at the same table as children whose clothes weren't as expensive, whose parents didn't drive luxury cars, whose zip codes didn't match his own. "I pay taxes in this city," Stevens declared, his voice rising above the whispers of studying children. "My daughter should not have to sit with these people." He gestured dismissively toward the homework table, as if the children were somehow contaminating the space with their presence. Margaret stood behind the circulation desk, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to maintain her professional composure. "Mr. Stevens," she said quietly, "this is a public library. All children are welcome here, not next to my daughter." Stevens snapped. "I want these kids moved, now, or I'll have your job." The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Margaret knew Stevens had the connections and the wealth to make good on his promise. She also knew that losing her job would mean losing everything: her apartment, her ability to help these children, her entire life's work. What Stevens didn't notice was the man sitting at a corner table, wearing dark sunglasses and a simple jacket, who had been coming to the library regularly for the past few months. Elvis Presley had discovered this place by accident, initially seeking a quiet refuge from the constant demands of fame. But he had stayed because of what he witnessed here every afternoon. Elvis had watched Margaret work with these children day after day. He had seen her patience with Tommy's reading struggles, her creativity in helping Sarah bridge language barriers, her excitement when Marcus solved a difficult math problem. He had also noticed the worn edges of her clothing, the careful way she counted change when she bought coffee from the library vending machine, and the love in her eyes when she looked at these children who weren't even her own. As Stephen's voice grew louder and more threatening, Elvis closed his book and stood up. The children at the homework table had stopped working entirely, their faces reflecting confusion and hurt at being called unwelcome in a place that had always felt safe. "Excuse me," Elvis said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded stages around the world. Stevens turned, ready to dismiss this interruption, but stopped short when he recognized the face behind the sunglasses. "Mr. Stevens, is it?" Elvis continued, approaching the circulation desk where Margaret stood frozen. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. I think there might be a misunderstanding here." Stevens's aggressive posture immediately shifted to something resembling starstruck confusion. "Mr. Presley, I didn't expect. I'm a huge fan, but this is a private matter between me and the librarian." "Well, see, that's where you're wrong," Elvis said, his southern drawl becoming more pronounced as it did when he was making a point. "Education isn't private, learning isn't private, and what's happening at that table over there?" He gestured toward the homework group. "That's the most beautiful thing I've seen in a long time." Margaret felt her breath catch as Elvis stepped closer to Stevens. She had dreamed of having an advocate, someone to stand up for her work, but she had never imagined it would be Elvis Presley himself. "Those children," Elvis continued, "are doing exactly what every child should be doing, learning, growing, helping each other succeed. And Miss Foster here," he turned to Margaret with a respectful nod, "she's doing exactly what every adult should be doing, making sure they have that chance." Stevens stammered, clearly torn between his prejudices and his desire to impress a celebrity. "But Mr. Presley, you don't understand. My daughter is going to attend private school next year. She shouldn't have to associate with children from different backgrounds." Elvis removed his sunglasses, and Margaret could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Mr. Stevens, let me tell you what I see when I look at that table. I see a young man who's going to be a scientist someday, because Miss Foster believed in him. I see a little girl who's going to help her parents achieve the American dream, because someone took the time to teach her. I see your daughter learning that kindness and intelligence come in all shapes and colors and economic situations." The library had become completely silent, except for Elvis's voice, which carried to every corner of the room. Even the children were listening intently, sensing that something important was happening. "Now, I could tell you about how I grew up poor in Mississippi," Elvis continued. "How libraries like this one were the only places where I could dream about becoming something more than what my circumstances suggested. But I think you need to hear about something more immediate." Elvis walked over to the homework table and gently placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Son, tell Mr. Stevens what you're studying." Marcus looked up nervously, but answered clearly, "Advanced algebra, sir. Miss Foster says I might be ready for calculus next year, even though I'm only in 7th grade." Elvis smiled and moved to Sarah. "And what about you, darling?" "I'm writing an essay about immigration," Sarah said, her English careful but confident. "Miss Foster is helping me interview my grandmother about coming to America. She says everyone's story matters." Finally, Elvis knelt beside Tommy. "And you, buddy?" Tommy's face lit up despite the tension in the room. "I'm reading about space exploration. Miss Foster found me books about the Apollo missions, and she says maybe I could work for NASA someday." Elvis stood and faced Stevens again. "These children aren't just learning subjects, Mr. Stevens. They're learning to dream, and they're learning that their dreams are valid, regardless of where they come from or how much money their parents make." Stevens looked uncomfortable, glancing between Elvis and the children. I didn't mean to suggest they couldn't learn. I just think there should be appropriate groupings." "Appropriate for what?" Elvis asked, his voice gentle but firm. appropriate for maintaining the idea that some children matter more than others, appropriate for teaching your daughter that she's better than kids who might actually teach her something about courage, determination, and overcoming obstacles. Margaret watched in amazement as Elvis continued his impromptu lesson in humanity. She had never seen anyone challenge wealth and privilege with such grace and effectiveness. "Miss Foster," Elvis said, turning to her, "would you mind telling Mr. Stevens about your work here?" Margaret cleared her throat nervously. "Well, I coordinate the after-school homework program. We help children with their studies, provide access to research materials, and offer tutoring in various subjects." "And how long have you been doing this?" Elvis prompted. 15 years, Margaret replied. "Since I started working here. And in those 15 years, what have you seen happen to the children who participate?" Margaret's voice grew stronger as she talked about her life's work. 93% of our regular participants graduate from high school. 67% go on to college. We've had children become teachers, nurses, engineers, business owners, and yes, even doctors. Elvis nodded approvingly. "And what does it cost parents to participate in this program?" "Nothing," Margaret said proudly. "It's completely free. Education should never depend on a family's ability to pay." Stevens shifted uncomfortably as he began to understand the implications of his complaint. "I didn't realize this was such a comprehensive program." "It's more than comprehensive," Elvis said. "It's transformative, and Miss Foster here," he gestured toward Margaret. "She's not just doing her job. She's changing lives, one child at a time." What Elvis didn't say, but what he had observed over his months of quiet visits, was that Margaret's dedication went far beyond her professional duties. He had noticed her carefully mending books with her own supplies, staying hours after her shift ended to help struggling students, and even bringing snacks for children who arrived hungry. "Mr. Stevens," Elvis continued, "your daughter Emma is lucky to be part of this program, not because she's getting free tutoring, but because she's learning lessons that no amount of private education can teach. She's learning that intelligence and worth aren't determined by economic status. She's learning to see potential in everyone. She's learning what real leadership looks like." Elvis walked over to Emma Stevens, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes. "Emma, honey, what do you think about studying with these other children?" Emma looked up at her father, then at Elvis, then back at the homework table where her study partners sat waiting. "I like it," she said quietly. "Marcus helps me with math sometimes, and Sarah taught me how to say hello in Chinese. Tommy knows everything about space." Stephen's face reddened as he realized his daughter was contradicting his assumptions. "Emma, we've talked about this." "Actually, Mr. Stevens," Elvis interrupted gently, "maybe it's time to listen to what Emma is trying to tell you. She's learning that friendship and learning don't have economic requirements. Isn't that the kind of daughter you want to raise?" The challenge hung in the air, and Margaret could see Stevens struggling with the public nature of this confrontation. He was being called out by Elvis Presley in front of his own daughter, and every word was making his position look more and more unreasonable. "I suppose," Stevens began reluctantly, "I may have been hasty in my assessment. People often are when they're trying to protect their children," Elvis said diplomatically, offering Stevens a way to save face. "But sometimes the best protection we can give our kids is the chance to see the world as it really is, full of good people working hard to make their lives better." Margaret felt tears forming in her eyes as she watched Elvis masterfully diffuse the situation while defending everything she believed in. But then Elvis did something that surprised everyone in the room. "Miss Foster," he said, "I wonder if you'd mind if I made a small contribution to your program." Margaret's heart began racing. "Mr. Presley, that's very generous." But Elvis held up a hand to stop her protest. "I've been watching what you do here for months. I've seen the difference you make in these children's lives. And I've noticed that you've been making some personal sacrifices to keep this program running." Margaret's cheeks flushed as she realized Elvis had observed more than she had thought. "It's not, I mean it's part of my job too." "No ma'am," Elvis said firmly. Buying books with your grocery money is not part of your job. Staying 2 hours past closing time is not part of your job. Learning Mandarin to communicate with parents is not part of your job. What you're doing here is a calling, and it deserves support. Stevens looked puzzled. She's been using her own money. For years, Elvis confirmed. Books, supplies, even snacks for kids who come here hungry after school. Miss Foster has been running a one-woman campaign to make sure no child's education suffers because of their family's financial situation. The businessman's expression changed as he began to understand the scope of Margaret's commitment. His daughter Emma was benefiting not just from free tutoring, but from a program sustained by someone else's personal sacrifice. Miss Foster, Elvis continued, I'd like to establish an endowment for your program. Enough to buy supplies, books, snacks, and maybe even expand to serve more children. Would you accept that? Margaret's hands flew to her mouth as she tried to process what she was hearing. Mr. Presley, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't. You could and you will, Elvis said with a smile. Because these children deserve it, and because what you're doing here is exactly the kind of work that makes the world better. Stevens cleared his throat. Mr. Presley, if you're making a contribution, I'd like to contribute as well. Elvis turned to him with raised eyebrows. That's wonderful, Mr. Stevens. What did you have in mind? Stevens looked uncomfortable but determined. I own several businesses in the city. I could provide internship opportunities for older students, maybe some part-time jobs for kids who need them. And, he paused, glancing at his daughter. I could help other parents understand what this program really offers. Emma beamed at her father, and Margaret could see the pride in the little girl's eyes. Stevens was learning the same lesson his daughter had already absorbed, that contributing to everyone's success was more rewarding than protecting privilege. That sounds like an excellent plan, Elvis said, extending his hand to Stevens. Partnership instead of separation. That's what America should be about. As the two men shook hands, Margaret felt the tension that had dominated the library for the past hour finally begin to dissipate. The children at the homework table, who had been silent witnesses to this adult drama, gradually returned to their studies. But Elvis wasn't finished. He approached the homework table and sat down in an empty chair. Mind if I join you all for a few minutes? I never did finish my education properly, and it looks like you might be able to teach me a thing or two. The children's excitement was barely contained as Elvis picked up one of Tommy's space books and began asking questions about rocket propulsion. Marcus shyly offered to show him some algebra problems, while Sarah explained her immigration essay. Margaret watched this scene with amazement, realizing that Elvis had accomplished something she had been trying to do for 15 years. He had shown that learning was valuable for everyone, regardless of age, fame, or economic status. Stevens lingered near the table, watching his daughter interact naturally with children he had tried to segregate just minutes earlier. Margaret could see him beginning to understand what she had always known, that diversity in education enriched everyone involved. After spending nearly an hour with the children, Elvis finally stood to leave. He approached Margaret at the circulation desk one more time. Miss Foster, he said quietly, I want you to know that what you do here matters more than any concert I've ever performed. You're changing the future, one child at a time. Margaret felt tears she had been holding back finally begin to fall. Mr. Presley, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me, Elvis replied. Just keep doing what you're doing, and don't spend your grocery money on books anymore. That's what endowments are for. As Elvis prepared to leave, Stevens approached him one more time. Mr. Presley, I owe you an apology, and I owe Miss Foster an even bigger one. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment about what's best for my daughter. Elvis nodded approvingly. Takes a big man to admit when he's wrong, Mr. Stevens. Your daughter's lucky to have a father who can learn and grow. Stevens turned to Margaret. Miss Foster, I'm sorry for my behavior today. Emma has told me wonderful things about this program, and I should have listened to her instead of making assumptions. I hope you'll accept my contribution, and I promise to be more supportive in the future." Margaret accepted his apology graciously, and as both men prepared to leave, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went far beyond anything she had experienced in her professional life. The children continued their studies, but the atmosphere had changed completely. They had witnessed something extraordinary, adults learning from each other, prejudice being overcome by understanding, and the power of education to bring people together rather than drive them apart. Elvis's promised endowment was established within the week, providing the library's children's program with resources Margaret had only dreamed of having. Stevens followed through on his commitments as well, creating internship opportunities and becoming one of the program's most vocal supporters in the community. But perhaps the most important outcome was less tangible. Word spread throughout Las Vegas about what had happened at the public library that October afternoon. Parents who had never considered using library services began bringing their children to the homework program. Business owners started volunteering their time and expertise. The program that Margaret had sustained through personal sacrifice became a community-wide effort to ensure that every child had access to educational support. Emma Stevens remained in the program and became one of its most enthusiastic participants. She later credited her experience studying with children from different backgrounds as one of the most valuable parts of her education, teaching her lessons about diversity, empathy, and social responsibility that no private school could have provided. Tommy Martinez did indeed pursue his interest in space exploration, eventually earning a scholarship to study aerospace engineering. Sarah Chen became a bilingual teacher, helping other immigrant families navigate the American educational system. Marcus Williams earned a full scholarship to MIT, and later returned to Las Vegas to establish a scholarship fund for promising math students from low-income families. Margaret Foster continued her work at the library for another 12 years before retiring. At her retirement party, attended by hundreds of former students, colleagues, and community members, she was honored not just for her professional service, but for her role in creating a model that had been replicated in libraries across the country. Elvis never publicly took credit for his role in transforming the library program, but those who were present that day never forgot what they witnessed. It became a powerful example of how one person's willingness to speak up against injustice can create ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate situation. The story of that October afternoon spread throughout the education community, becoming a case study in the power of inclusive learning environments and the importance of defending educational equity. It demonstrated that learning happens best when children from all backgrounds come together, sharing their unique perspectives and experiences. Years later, when people asked Margaret what she was most proud of in her career, she would tell them about the day Elvis Presley sat at a homework table with 7 children and showed an entire community what education really meant. It wasn't about economic status or social privilege. It was about recognizing potential wherever it exists and providing every child with the support they need to reach it. The Las Vegas Public Library's children's program became a model for similar initiatives across the country, proving that when communities commit to supporting all children's education, everyone benefits. The program's success attracted national attention, leading to increased funding for public library educational services and recognition of librarians as crucial partners in child development. But for Margaret, the most meaningful outcome was simpler and more personal. She had spent 15 years believing in the power of education to transform lives, and on that October day, she learned that others believed in her work strongly enough to fight for it. The support she received allowed her to continue her mission without personal sacrifice, focusing entirely on what she did best: helping children discover their potential and achieve their dreams. The transformation that began that day extended far beyond the walls of the Las Vegas Public Library. Within 6 months, Margaret's program had expanded to serve over 200 children daily, with a waiting list of families eager to participate. The endowment Elvis established grew through additional community contributions, eventually reaching over $500,000 and ensuring the program's sustainability for decades to come. Richard Stevens became one of the program's most dedicated advocates, using his business connections to create educational partnerships throughout the city. His company established a scholarship program specifically for students who had participated in the library's homework assistance initiative, recognizing that these children often demonstrated exceptional resilience and determination. The impact on individual families was profound and lasting. Mrs. Chen, Sarah's grandmother, began volunteering at the library, teaching basic Mandarin to children interested in learning about Chinese culture. Her broken English and patient demeanor made her one of the most beloved volunteers, and she often spoke about how the library had become like a second family to her. Tommy Martinez's father, inspired by his son's academic success, enrolled in adult education classes offered at the library in the evenings. He eventually earned his GED and was promoted to a supervisory position at the casino where he worked. The family credited the library's supportive environment with changing their entire trajectory. Marcus Williams' mother found steady employment through connections she made with other parents in the program. The network of families that formed around the homework initiative became a source of mutual support, with parents helping each other find jobs, childcare, and resources for their children's education. Elvis continued to visit the library regularly, though he maintained a low profile to avoid disrupting the children's studies. Staff members would occasionally find anonymous donations of books and supplies, always accompanied by a simple note, "For the dreamers." Margaret suspected these gifts came from Elvis, but she never asked, and he never confirmed it. The media attention surrounding the library program led to invitations for Margaret to speak at educational conferences across the country. Her presentations about inclusive learning environments and the importance of community support for education became required viewing in many teacher training programs. Dr. Patricia Williams, a researcher from the University of Nevada, conducted a longitudinal study of children who had participated in Margaret's program. Her findings, published in the Journal of Educational Psychology, demonstrated measurably higher graduation rates, college attendance, and career success among program participants compared to their peers. The research helped secure federal funding for similar programs in libraries nationwide. Emma Stevens grew up to become an advocate for educational equity herself, serving on the school board and establishing a foundation focused on providing resources for underserved students. She often spoke about how her childhood experience in the library program taught her that diversity in education benefits everyone involved. As Margaret approached retirement, she reflected on the thousands of children who had passed through the library's doors during her tenure. Each success story reinforced her belief that every child deserves access to educational support, regardless of their family's economic circumstances. The program's success attracted international attention as well. Delegations from libraries in Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom visited Las Vegas to study the model and implement similar initiatives in their own communities. The concept of libraries as comprehensive educational support centers, rather than simply repositories of books, gained widespread acceptance. Local businesses began partnering with the program in innovative ways. A restaurant owner provided healthy snacks for children who arrived hungry after school. An accounting firm offered financial literacy classes for teenagers. A local theater group provided drama workshops that helped shy children build confidence and communication skills. The children themselves became ambassadors for the program, inviting friends and siblings to participate. Word-of-mouth promotion from satisfied students and families proved more effective than any formal marketing campaign could have been. Margaret established formal partnerships with local schools, ensuring that children who needed additional support could be easily referred to the library program. Teachers began incorporating library research projects into their curricula, creating seamless connections between classroom learning and community resources. The success of the homework assistance program inspired other libraries to expand their educational offerings. Adult literacy classes, computer training for seniors, and English as a second language instruction became common features in public libraries throughout Nevada and beyond. When Margaret finally retired in 1987, her farewell celebration filled the library's main hall with former students, colleagues, parents, and community leaders. Elvis sent a congratulatory message that was read aloud. Miss Foster proved that education is the greatest gift we can give our children, and she gave it freely to everyone who needed it. Her legacy will inspire generations of learners. The Margaret Foster Children's Educational Center was officially dedicated 6 months after her retirement, ensuring that her philosophy and methods would continue to guide the program's development. A bronze statue of Margaret reading to a diverse group of children was installed in the library's children's section, capturing the inclusive spirit she had fostered. Today, nearly 50 years after that transformative October afternoon, the Las Vegas Public Library serves as a model for educational equity and community engagement. The program that began with Margaret's personal sacrifice and Elvis's public support has touched the lives of thousands of families and demonstrates the profound impact that occurs when communities commit to supporting every child's potential. The original homework table where Tommy, Sarah, Marcus, and Emma studied together has been preserved as part of the library's permanent exhibition about the history of public education in Las Vegas. Visitors from around the world come to see where a librarian's dedication and a musician's moral courage combine to create lasting social change. A plaque near that table reads, "Education belongs to everyone. October 14, 1975. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to that day's events is found in the hundreds of success stories that emerged from Margaret's program: doctors, teachers, engineers, artists, and community leaders, who trace their achievements back to afternoons spent at a homework table where every child was valued, supported, and encouraged to dream big. The ripple effects of that October day continue to spread, proving that sometimes the most important battles for social justice are won not through grand gestures or legislative victories, but through the patient, persistent work of individuals who believe that every child deserves a chance to succeed, and who are willing to fight for that principle one student at a time. The lessons learned that afternoon resonated far beyond education policy. Corporate executives who heard the story began examining their own assumptions about merit, potential, and opportunity. Churches incorporated messages about inclusive community building into their sermons. Parents reconsidered how they talked to their children about differences in economic status and social background. Margaret's approach to education became a subject of academic study, with researchers from Harvard, Stanford, and other prestigious universities conducting detailed analyses of her methods. They found that her success stemmed not from revolutionary techniques, but from fundamental principles that had somehow been forgotten in many educational settings: treating every child with dignity, recognizing individual strengths, and maintaining unwavering belief in each student's potential. The documentation of Margaret's work revealed innovative strategies that other educators began adopting. Her practice of learning basic phrases in her students' native languages became a standard recommendation for teachers working with immigrant families. Her method of connecting academic subjects to students' personal interests and career goals was incorporated into teacher training programs nationwide. Elvis's role in the story became part of music history as well as educational history. Biographers noted that his intervention at the library demonstrated the same values that had always driven his music: respect for all people regardless of background, belief in the power of dreams, and commitment to using his platform for positive change. The incident was cited as evidence of his genuine character, separate from his public persona. The business community's response to the story created lasting changes in corporate social responsibility practices. Richard Stevens' transformation from antagonist to advocate inspired other wealthy individuals to examine their own biases and find constructive ways to support education. The scholarship program he established eventually expanded to serve students throughout Nevada and became a model for similar initiatives in other states. Educational researchers discovered that the library program's success stemmed partly from its informal atmosphere, which reduced the anxiety and competition that sometimes hindered learning in traditional classroom settings. Children felt safe to ask questions, make mistakes, and learn at their own pace. This insight led to reforms in classroom design and teaching methods that prioritized emotional safety alongside academic rigor. The program's impact on family dynamics was equally significant. Parents who initially felt intimidated by educational institutions found the library's welcoming environment encouraged their involvement in their children's learning. Many parents began pursuing their own educational goals, inspired by their children's progress and the supportive community they found at the library. Margaret's story became required reading in library science programs, demonstrating how librarians could expand their role beyond traditional services to become catalysts for social change. The American Library Association established the Margaret Foster Award for Innovative Community Programming, recognizing librarians who create inclusive educational opportunities in their communities. The children who benefited from the program carried its lessons into their adult careers and relationships. They became advocates for inclusive practices in their workplaces, supporters of educational equity in their communities, and parents who taught their own children to value diversity and opportunity for all. Tommy Martinez, who had struggled with reading as a 9-year-old, eventually earned a PhD in astrophysics and led a team that discovered 3 new exoplanets. In his acceptance speech for a prestigious scientific award, he credited Margaret Foster with teaching him that intelligence comes in many forms and that patient support can unlock potential that might otherwise remain hidden. Sarah Chen became the first member of her family to attend college, earning degrees in education and linguistics. She developed a bilingual teaching methodology that was adopted in school districts with large immigrant populations across the United States. Her work helped thousands of non-English-speaking children succeed academically while maintaining pride in their cultural heritage. Marcus Williams' mathematical gifts led him to Wall Street, where he became a successful financial analyst before returning to Las Vegas to establish a community investment fund focused on supporting local education initiatives. He often spoke about how Margaret's belief in his abilities gave him the confidence to pursue ambitious goals despite growing up in poverty. Emma Stevens used her experience to become a champion for educational reform at the state level. As a state legislator, she authored bills that increased funding for library programs and required schools to implement inclusive practices that served students from all economic backgrounds. Her legislation became a template for similar reforms in other states. The library itself underwent physical renovations to better serve its expanded mission. New study areas were designed to accommodate different learning styles and group sizes. Technology centers were added to ensure all children had access to computers and internet resources. The children's section was enlarged and redesigned based on research about optimal learning environments. Margaret's personal story of sacrifice became a powerful tool for advocating for better compensation for educators and librarians. Her willingness to spend her own money on supplies highlighted the inadequate funding that many educational programs faced. This led to increased public support for education budgets and recognition of the true costs of providing quality learning opportunities. The program's success in bridging economic divides attracted attention from urban planners and sociologists studying community cohesion. The library became a case study in how public spaces could be designed and programmed to bring together people from different backgrounds and create positive social interactions that strengthened entire neighborhoods. International visitors to the program included education ministers from developing countries who were working to expand access to learning opportunities in their own nations. The model of using libraries as community education centers was adapted for different cultural contexts and resource levels, demonstrating the universal applicability of Margaret's core principles. As years passed, reunions of program alumni became annual celebrations that drew hundreds of former students back to Las Vegas. These gatherings served multiple purposes, honoring Margaret's legacy, networking among successful professionals who shared common educational roots, and inspiring current students by showing them examples of what was possible with dedication and support. The story of that October afternoon became part of local folklore, passed down through families and community organizations as an example of how ordinary people could create extraordinary change. Children who hadn't even been born when the incident occurred grew up knowing about Margaret Foster and Elvis Presley's partnership in defending educational equity. Documentary filmmakers, journalists, and authors created various accounts of the library transformation, each focusing on different aspects of the story. Some emphasized the educational innovations, others highlighted the social justice themes, and still others explored the role of celebrity advocacy in creating positive change. All agreed that the combination of Margaret's dedication and Elvis's moral courage had created something uniquely powerful. The financial impact of the program extended beyond individual success stories. Economic studies showed that communities with strong educational support systems experienced higher property values, increased business development, and lower crime rates. The library's transformation contributed to Las Vegas's evolution from an entertainment destination to a thriving metropolitan area with diverse economic opportunities. Today, the Margaret Foster approach to community education continues to evolve and expand. New technologies have been integrated into the program, but the fundamental principles remain unchanged. Every child has potential. Learning happens best in inclusive environments, and communities thrive when they invest in all their members' success. The homework table, where it all began, still serves students every afternoon, a testament to the enduring power of one person's vision and the community's commitment to making that vision reality. The legacy of that transformative October day lives on in ways that Margaret and Elvis could never have imagined. The simple act of one person standing up against prejudice, supported by another person's moral courage, created ripples that continue to shape lives decades later. It proved that heroism isn't always dramatic or headline-grabbing Gandurg. Sometimes it's as quiet as a librarian staying late to help a struggling student, or as simple as a famous person using their voice to defend what's right. The program's influence extended into unexpected areas of society and culture. Social workers began using Margaret's inclusive approach as a model for community organizing. Religious organizations adapted her methods for youth programs that brought together children from different backgrounds. Sports teams and recreational programs implemented similar strategies for creating unity among diverse participants. Corporate diversity training programs began incorporating the library story as a case study in overcoming unconscious bias and recognizing hidden talent. Business schools taught courses on Margaret's leadership style, analyzing how she had created lasting organizational change through patience, consistency, and unwavering commitment to her principles. The artistic community was also inspired by the story. Musicians composed songs about the power of education to transform communities. Visual artists created murals depicting children of different backgrounds learning together. Writers crafted novels and plays exploring themes of social justice, educational equity, and the courage required to challenge established systems. Margaret's influence on library science extended far beyond her own institution. Her innovations in community programming became standard practices taught in graduate programs worldwide. The concept of libraries as educational equity centers, rather than merely book repositories, revolutionized how communities viewed and funded these institutions. Research conducted on the program's participants revealed insights that influenced child development theory. Psychologists discovered that children who learned in diverse, supportive environments showed increased empathy, better problem-solving skills, and greater resilience when facing academic challenges. These findings supported arguments for inclusive education policies at local, state, and federal levels. The technological evolution of the program reflected broader changes in society while maintaining its core values. Computer literacy training was added in the 1980s, internet safety education in the 1990s, and digital creativity workshops in the 2000s. Each edition was carefully planned to serve all children equally, regardless of their family's technological resources. Parent education became an integral part of the program as well. Workshops on supporting children's learning at home, understanding the American educational system, and advocating for their children's needs helped entire families succeed. These sessions were offered in multiple languages and at various times to accommodate working parents' schedules. The scholarship programs inspired by Margaret's work eventually created a network of support that extended from elementary school through graduate studies. Students who received help as children often returned as adults to mentor new participants, creating a cycle of giving back that strengthened the entire community. Local government officials regularly cited the library program as evidence of successful public investment in education. The measurable improvements in graduation rates, college attendance, and career success among program participants provided compelling data for budget discussions and policy decisions. Margaret's retirement celebration in 1987 became a community-wide festival that demonstrated the depth of her impact. Former students traveled from across the country to honor her. Politicians proclaimed a Margaret Foster Day. Local businesses donated services and products for the event. Elvis sent a congratulatory video message that brought tears to many eyes. The establishment of the Margaret Foster Children's Educational Center ensured that her methods and philosophy would be preserved and transmitted to future generations of educators. The center became a research institute, training facility, and model program that attracted visitors from around the world. Annual conferences focusing on inclusive education and community-based learning drew thousands of participants to Las Vegas. These events became forums for sharing innovations, discussing challenges, and celebrating successes in programs inspired by Margaret's work. The conferences helped create a national network of educators committed to serving all children effectively. The program's impact on reducing educational inequality was documented in numerous academic studies that influenced policy at the highest levels of government. Federal education legislation began incorporating provisions for community-based support systems, library-school partnerships, and inclusive programming requirements. As the children who had benefited from Margaret's program became parents themselves, they ensured that their own children understood the importance of educational opportunity for all. This intergenerational transmission of values created a lasting cultural shift in how the community viewed diversity, equity, and mutual support. The physical space of the library continued to evolve to meet changing needs while honoring its history. The original homework table was preserved as a historical artifact, but the program now occupied multiple rooms designed specifically for different types of learning activities. Quiet study areas, collaborative workspaces, technology centers, and creative arts studios all reflected Margaret's understanding that children learn in different ways. Margaret's personal story of sacrifice continued to inspire educators facing similar challenges. Professional development programs used her example to encourage teachers and librarians to advocate for their students while also taking care of their own well-being. The balance between dedication and self-preservation became an important topic in discussions about sustainable educational practice. The community's response to Margaret's work demonstrated the power of collective action in supporting education. When residents understood how the program benefited not just individual children but the entire community, they became willing to invest time, money, and political capital in its success. This lesson was applied to other community challenges, creating a culture of collaborative problem-solving. International recognition of the program led to exchanges with educators from other countries who were working to expand educational opportunities in their own communities. These cultural exchanges enriched the program while spreading its influence to different continents and educational systems. The story of Elvis's intervention became part of music history courses that explored how artists could use their platforms for social good. His example inspired other musicians to become involved in educational causes, creating a tradition of celebrity advocacy for learning opportunities that continues today. Margaret's influence on individual lives created multiplicative effects as her former students became leaders in their communities. The values she taught, feats that every person has worth, that diversity strengthens learning, and that communities must invest in all their children, were carried forward by thousands of people who applied these principles in their professional and personal relationships. The program's success in creating social cohesion across economic lines provided a model for addressing other forms of community division. The methods that worked in bringing together children from different backgrounds were adapted for initiatives addressing racial integration, intergenerational programming, and cultural exchange. As Margaret aged, she remained actively involved in the program's development, serving as an advisor and mentor to new staff members. Her presence provided continuity and institutional memory while ensuring that the program's core values were preserved even as methods and technologies evolved. The documentary record of the program's development, carefully maintained from its earliest days, became a valuable resource for researchers studying community change, educational innovation, and social justice movements. The archives included student work, parent testimonials, staff reflections, and external evaluations that provided comprehensive documentation of the program's evolution and impact. Today, more than 4 decades after that October afternoon when Elvis Presley stood up for educational equity, the principles demonstrated that day continue to guide communities working to ensure that every child has access to the support they need to succeed. The homework table where it all began remains a powerful symbol of what becomes possible when individuals have the courage to challenge injustice and the wisdom to build inclusive communities where everyone can thrive.